Good evening, Lake Orion. Welcome to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taramina. On this episode, I want to talk about the role of the neutrals during World War II. One of the biggest things that we talk about with World War II is the countries that actually fought, which was in the Allies. The main Allies were the United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, also France to a lesser extent. And then for the Axis powers, you talk about Germany, Italy, and Japan. But there was a lot of, as we made mention in the World War II segment that I've had for History Now, every country was involved in World War II in one way or another. I wanted to share with you today the role of the neutrals, the neutral countries that fought in World War II because of there was roles in espionage, there could have been direct contacts, potentials between Allies and Axis parties involved, but all of these countries played a role. And I want to talk about mostly focusing more on 6 of these countries. I want to first talk about the role of the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, Now, I want to talk about both these countries separately, but both of them played a role in basically keeping out of the war, but also allowing for espionage and trade and to continue. So, in many ways, the roles of the neutrals, though sometimes not mentioned to the extent of the major parties, but they also played a role in the war as well. I want to first talk about Spain. I covered a lot of Spain back when I was in college. And so Spain ended up sending troops to fight the Soviet Union in World War II in 1941 in the Blue Division. At this time, Spain was a weakened economic country. They had owed debts to Hitler and Mussolini from the Spanish Civil War. The economy was devastated. The economy was in ruins. Also, the Spanish were war-weary. There was a lot of communist Spanish supporters that were living in France at that time. So the nationalists had taken power. Franco took a position of non-belligerency. He at first went neutral, but then he changed his prime minister to Ramon Soriano Suner, who was very pro-Germany. At first, his prime minister was pro-Britain, and then when he brought in Suner, he openly supported Germany. So as a result, Spain was leaning more towards the Spanish or the Axis side of things. Obviously, very anti-communist. He, as I said, made mention, he did send troops to fight the Soviet Union. But Hitler and Franco, who was the President Francisco Franco, who's the president of Spain, or the Spanish dictator, as some point out, he ruled from 1936 to 1975. Hitler and Franco met at Haidan, which was in the northern parts of Spain, and this conference was very well known for Hitler attempted to get Spain to side with Germany and Italy and to side with the Axis powers. However, Hitler favored Vichy France, which at that time France had been occupied by Nazi Germany, and France was divided into two. Vichy France was aiding the Germans much more than the Spanish. So Hitler and Franco met. Hitler was trying to persuade Franco to joined the war on the side of the Axis powers. Spain, Franco asked for major economic concessions. Franco was asking for grain, for bread, for basically weapons. I mean, because there was a lot of focus on wanting to bring Gibraltar, something that the Spanish was very interested in having, and wanting it back from the British since the 1700s. So Spain wanted Gibraltar back, but they could not economically get it. And Hitler wanted the Canary Islands, something that Spain was not willing to give. Also, Hitler wanted also the issue of Africa. Spain wanted territory in Africa, and Hitler was not willing to guarantee that Franco would be able to receive territory in Africa in favor of Vichy France. So Franco made ridiculous demand after ridiculous demand. Hitler ended up getting angry, and he would later tell Mussolini he'd rather have 3 or 4 teeth chucked out than go through another meeting with Franco. Spain also relied on the United States for oil, and but they were agreed to listen to Britain on this. Also, Winston Churchill was bribing Franco to stay out of the war. But as I said, Franco was also very anti-communist. He sent troops to fight without declaring war, which was the Blue Division. So Spain ended up being neutral. They were kind of forced to stay neutral because of their economic issues. They were also devastated after the Spanish Civil War. And U.S. and Britain, and then when Spain realized Germany was losing the war, they ended up not doing as much business with Germany, or they would tax Germany economically more. Franco would replace his son-in-law sooner for a British-supported prime minister, and Spain was able to stay neutral barely in World War II. The other country in the Iberian Peninsula was Portugal. Portugal was at that time the Estado Nuevo, Antonio de Salazar. Salazar remained friendly with the United Kingdom. At that time, the U.S.-Portuguese alliance in the 1700s was the longest alliance in the war, and Britain supported Portugal's stance to remain neutral. Salazar, like Franco, was anti-communist, but he did not like the Nazis. He did not like Hitler. So he remained friendly with Britain, but he was also trying to keep Spain out of the war. So early on, Salazar and Franco signed the Iberian Pact, which was in March 17, 1939, that was signed. There was a further additional protocol added in 1940. The goal was to keep Hitler out of the Iberian Peninsula. Now, if you look at your history, Portugal and Spain were theaters in the Napoleonic Wars, in which Napoleon invaded Spain, invaded Portugal, and as a result, he kept Hitler out, and as a result, they didn't want history to repeat itself. So Salazar and Franco worked together to keep the Iberian Peninsula out of the war, and it played a major role because the Iberian Peninsula was not a theater in World War II, even though it could have been when the Allies decided to go through, invade Africa to get to the soft underbelly, which was Italy, but the United States decided to invade Africa instead of going through Spain and to provoke them. When we come back to history now, I want to talk about Sweden's role, Switzerland's role, here on History Now on ONTV.
Hey, it's ONTV here. Now, have you ever had the urge to create your own TV show? Or just wanted to see what goes behind the scenes of making one? Well, we have just the program for you. ONTV offers production classes, which allow you to take control and create the programs you want them to be. To get started, all you have to do is sign up for a free orientation, and then register for one of our production courses. For more information, feel free to call us at 248-393-1060, or go to orionontv.org and click Register Now to sign up for classes. We hope to see you soon.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Terramina. I want to continue talking about, real briefly, about Portugal and Spain real quick before I talk about Sweden and Switzerland, because after the United States and Great Britain were fighting in Africa, Portugal's colonies, especially its Asian colonies, even though they were declared neutral, but there was Portuguese Timor in particular was occupied by Japan, so some countries, so it impacted diplomatic relations, especially between Portugal and Japan. Now, Portugal would eventually sever relations with Japan, but it didn't really soar relations with Germany and Italy until the very end of the war. Same with Spain. Spain didn't sever relations with Japan until 1944, but kept relations with Germany and Italy, especially before 1943 with the fall of Mussolini and his regime. Spain was very, very loyal. Franco was very, very loyal to Mussolini and very, very friendly to Mussolini. So there was a great relationship there between Franco and Mussolini. But Italy wanted her own ambitions in Africa, and that caused a little bit of strain between Italy and Spain. Now, before we conclude the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, their roles cannot be denied. A lot of times it's seen as Portugal being pro-Allied, Spain being pro-Axis. But at the same time, they really counteracted each other. They really needed each other to survive the war. Now, as a result, Portugal and Spain ended up gaining more respect for each other at the end of the war. Portugal would go to bat for Spain on multiple occasions, especially at the end of World War II. Both were anti-communist. Both were pretty much in the same position. Both had trade with Germany and Italy. But both stayed out of the war because of their reliance to each other and the ability to prevent war on the Iberian Peninsula. Now I want to talk about another country that really played a role, which was Sweden. Sweden at this time was led by King Gustav V, who was the king from 1907 to 1950. His prime minister was Per Albin Hansson. Sweden ended up supporting Finland during the Winter War, which was a war fought between Finland and the Soviet Union in 1940. The Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Swedes supported Finland and allowed for supplies to be sent to Finland through Sweden. And Sweden initially was neutral. They were trading with both sides. But the invasion of Denmark and Norway in 1940 changed all that. It meant that Germany was the major trading partner to Sweden. Finland at that time was fighting with the Soviet Union. So in a way, Sweden was forced to trade with Germany. All Allied trade was cut off. And there was a lot of hostility from Britain, particularly Churchill, who back in the 1940s, he said Sweden played both sides for profit, to benefit themselves. So as a result, he would trade with both sides and played both sides for profit. Now, in 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, forced Sweden to do business a lot more, become the major trading partner. In 1941, following the invasion of the Soviet Union, Germany wanted Sweden to join the war on the side of the Germans. The Swedish government refused, and this was part of what you call the Summer Crisis, which the Nazis, Hitler wanted the Swedes to join the war. Sweden, benefiting economically from being neutral, refused to join it, didn't want to put their troops in harm's way. They openly supported the Nazis during the invasion of the Soviet Union, but they did not want any part of the fighting in the war, unlike Finland, who aided the Nazis during World War II, but was able to overcome and get out of, and was able to be okay war-wise following the end of the war, despite losing some of their land to the Soviet Union. In 1943, the reality of the Germans were losing the war caused the Swedish government to resist much more German pressures. Now, also what was going on was in Denmark. At that time, the Danish government was resigned, and a big part of that was the Germans were issuing demands on the Danes, wanting them to hand over all their Jews, all the Jewish population, which the Danish government refused. Germany was forcing trade, more and more trade on Denmark. And in 1943, the government resigned. So that meant that the German police at that time had free rein to round up all of the Danish Jews. But with the help of several Danish citizens, they were able to ship nearly all of Denmark's Jews over to Sweden. And those who were rounded up were taken to concentration camps instead of extermination camps. And but the majority of Danish Jews went to Sweden, and that was a large part with the help of Danish citizens, but also support from Sweden, who at first it was hard to get into Sweden, but as situation was going on in Denmark, the government decided to allow all of the Danish Jews to come into Sweden and stay there until the end of the war. So there was also there was the Swedish press, which the Germans wanted censorship on the Swedish press, but you were able to be open to talking about what was going on in the war, and that also caused further strain between the Germans and the Swedes. Now, the Germans were trading with the Swedes as well. They were a major trading partner. They were able to do business, especially in Norway and into Denmark. But Sweden never fully joined the war on the side of the Nazis. Now, another country that was right in the middle of Europe, right in the middle of Germany and Italy, and that was Switzerland. They were initially neutral. Hitler wanted to plan an invasion, and I'm going to talk about that when we come back to History Now here on ONTV. Hello, Oakland County. This is Sammy Taramina talking OA Now. In it, we'll talk various stories ranging from the state to Oakland County teams affecting the OAA. Catch us here on OA Now. Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I'm Anthony Taramina. I want to talk about Switzerland and their role in World War II. As I said, Switzerland was neutral early on, but also they were bombed by both sides as a result. It became a bigger home for espionage, safe havens. The Swiss also, or yes, the Switzerland's, the Swiss had a very strict Jewish policy, which it was very difficult for Jews to enter Switzerland. You had to be, they were really, really strict on having Jews enter their country. But Hitler was planning in 1940 an invasion of Switzerland, but instead they decided to go with bombing of Britain instead. So, but Switzerland was able to stay neutral. The Swiss had troops near the German border. They were preparing for war with Germany, just like in World War I, but ended up, the Germans invaded, or they avoided going into Switzerland altogether. And the Swiss had a capable fighting force that could fight back the Germans. So the Germans left Switzerland alone. They were doing business, especially economic business. A lot of currency was in Switzerland. After the war, there was a lot of gold and other supplies and other arts and works that were found in Switzerland. So Switzerland was kind of the place for espionage, safe havens, especially during the war. And also Switzerland had, Switzerland, like Sweden, both those countries had relations between other countries who were not on speaking terms. So the Swiss would often be the third party between the United States. Say, for example, the United States had relationship with Japan. They weren't on speaking terms. So Switzerland became that third party in which relationships could be addressed and taken care of. Switzerland and Sweden both played those roles during the war. They were the third party. They were that party that the countries relied on for relations during the war times. Another country that gets talked about that is Ireland. A lot of the assumption was Ireland would aid the British during the war, but the Irish decided to stay neutral. They had some deep resentments towards Great Britain. There was the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, who openly sided with the Nazis. Ireland, however, the government claimed neutrality. They did not want to be involved in the war. Often they were also bombed by both sides. The Germans would bomb them, especially if they missed their targets in Britain. The British would accidentally bomb them, so they both had to make massive reparations to the Irish government. The Irish had the Irish also was, they did not want to have Britain occupying any of their territories. So the United States was able to send a force, at least early on, in the 1940s. So Ireland was able to stay neutral, but they were often having to deal with constant bombings by both the British and the Germans. Now, the last country I want to talk about is Turkey. Turkey had a non-aggression pact with Germany. Originally, Turkey wanted to use Germany as a buffer against the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was ambitious over land in Turkey. So more often than not, the Turks used the Germans as a buffer against the Soviet Union. But when the Germans started invading France, Turkey wanted to have a non-aggression pact with the Germans, which was agreed, and Germany and Turkey again became trading partners. But the government was determined to preserve the neutral peace so that Turkey did not take a side. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the Turks celebrated, hoping that the Soviets would be crushed, would be defeated, but again, not sending any troops into battle. and into battle. But as the war started turning against Germany, the Turks continued their neutral stance, and the Allies were keen to get Turkey in the war on the side of the Allies, but the Turks had to give up land to the Soviet Union. But as a result, Turkey did declare war on the Soviet Union, Turkey did declare war on Germany, excuse me. But they were always very fearful of the Soviet Union, and Turkey would become a major ally to the West following the Cold War. And they continued to throughout the Cold War. Now, the legacy of all these countries during the war was there was always that role the neutrals had nothing to do in the war. That's not true. Each of these countries played a significant role in the war, whether it was having embassies in occupied countries. One thing I didn't mention was the role in Sweden with the role of Raoul Wallenberg, who was a Swedish diplomat who saved several Jews in Hungary, and he did it under Swedish protection. Many of these countries provided protections to Jews during World War II, especially the Swedes. They also were able to be control of espionage. They were safe havens. So there was a lot of spying going on in these countries. But the roles of these countries are important because, there was always that third side. You had the Allied side, you had the Axis side, and then you had the neutral side, which if you were neutral, it's important to have relations with both countries, with both sides, which these 6 countries did. So Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Ireland, Turkey, they all had roles they played in the war. Maybe not the biggest roles, but they still had roles in the war. And I think it's important that we share those beliefs, those views, just as importantly as we would for the major parties in World War II. Well, that will do it for this episode of History Now. Catch back for later episodes. Have a great night. See you soon, Lake Orion. And ta-ta for now.